What if the charity closest to Prince Harry's heart, the one that gave him solace, purpose, and an unshakable sense of identity after the tragic loss of his mother, suddenly became the battlefield for Meghan Markle's most controversial move yet? What if a single no from a charity CEO shook not just Meghan's carefully curated image, but the entire foundation of the Sussex brand? And what if this battle wasn't about fame or money or even power, but about the dignity of children caught in the crossfire of royal drama and Hollywood ambition? That's the storm we're stepping into. Because just recently, a story erupted that sounded almost too explosive to be real. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, was reportedly banned from attending the prestigious WellChild Awards in the United Kingdom. And not by some faceless committee or distant board. No, this decision came directly from Matt James, the CEO of WellChild itself. His reasoning? Meghan's alleged plan to bring a Netflix crew into the sacred, private space of a charity devoted to vulnerable, seriously ill children. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now, let that sink in for a moment. Imagine it. Children fighting for their lives, families holding on to every moment, and cameras, Hollywood cameras, potentially rolling in the background. The clash between compassion and commerce couldn't be more stark. But why now? Why would Matt James, a man known for diplomacy and careful stewardship of a beloved charity, take such a drastic step? Why would he risk controversy, headlines, and possible backlash from one of the most media-savvy couples in the world? And why does this story matter not just to the royal family, but to every viewer watching right now? Because this isn't just a headline. This is about the collision of two worlds. The quiet, selfless mission of charity work and the insatiable hunger of celebrity branding. It's about where we draw the line between compassion and exploitation. And it's about a CEO standing up to one of the most powerful PR machines on earth, at a time when few dare to challenge it. So let's pull the curtain back. The WellChild Awards have long been a source of pride for Prince Harry. Year after year, he attended, not just as a royal figurehead, but as a man visibly moved by the stories of the children he met. Tearful speeches, heartfelt hugs, moments of raw humanity. These weren't just staged photo ops. For Harry, it seemed deeply personal. And for the public, WellChild became one of those rare causes that reminded them why the monarchy could still matter in a modern world. Because it put faces and names to struggles bigger than politics or scandal. But enter Meghan. A woman with a Hollywood past, a Netflix contract, and a reputation for never missing a chance to shape the narrative. When she joined Harry at WellChild events, the energy shifted. Yes, she smiled, hugged, and clapped in all the right places. But whispers soon grew louder. Was the event about the children, or about Meghan Markle? Now fast forward to the present. Meghan and Harry's multi-million-dollar Netflix deal is teetering under pressure. They need content. They need spectacle. They need moments that will keep subscribers hooked. And what better backdrop than Harry's most meaningful charity? The optics are powerful. The prince who lost his mother, comforting sick children, with his glamorous wife by his side. It's heart-tugging. It's cinematic. It's viral. But is it ethical? That's where Matt James drew the line. This wasn't just a matter of logistics. This was about principle. WellChild is a safe haven, not a stage. Families open their lives and hearts in an environment of trust. To insert Netflix cameras into that equation would risk shattering that trust forever. And when whispers reached James that Meghan intended to bring a crew to film, not for WellChild's benefit, but for her own brands, he reportedly acted with decisiveness that stunned insiders. He banned her. Think about the weight of that. Meghan Markle, whose every move dominates headlines, whose presence commands global attention, being told, no, not here, not this time. And here's where the story twists. Because this decision doesn't just bruise Meghan's pride, it threatens her entire strategy. Her partnership with Netflix thrives on access, on behind-the-scenes moments that feel intimate, exclusive, raw. Without access to events like WellChild, the Sussex's brand loses authenticity. It loses heart. And Meghan knows it. But here's the bigger question for you, watching right now. Was Matt James right? Did he protect the sanctity of a charity event, or did he cross into the dangerous territory of wading into royal politics? Should Meghan, as Harry's wife and a former working royal, have been allowed to attend regardless of her intentions? Or was this the line that had to be drawn? These aren't easy questions, and that's why this story has captivated so many. Because it isn't just about Meghan's ban. It's about what happens when Hollywood ambition collides with human vulnerability. And yet, the deeper we dig, the more contradictions we find. Meghan has often spoken about compassion, about giving voice to the voiceless, about lifting others up. But critics argue that moments like this expose the gap between words and actions. How can you champion compassion while allegedly using sick children as backdrops for streaming content? It's a contradiction so sharp, it cuts her image in two. Meanwhile, Harry, who once embodied WellChild's very soul, finds himself caught in the middle. Does he stand by his wife's ambitions, or by the charity that gave him purpose? His silence on the matter has only fueled speculation. Because silence, in this case, isn't neutral. It speaks volumes. And what about the royal family? Sources whisper that William and Charles have been quietly supportive of WellChild's stance. After all, the monarchy thrives on dignity and restraint, not on Netflix dramatics. Could this be yet another moment where Harry finds himself drifting further away from the institution that once defined him? But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Meghan's brand has always relied on defiance. When doors close, she reframes it as proof of her independence, her courage, her strength against the odds. So will this ban become another narrative for her, another chance to claim victimhood, to say she was silenced or excluded unfairly? Or will the optics finally shift against her, painting her not as the underdog, but as the opportunist? This tension between charity and celebrity, between compassion and commerce, between Harry's heart and Meghan's ambition, is what makes this story so gripping. It isn't black and white. It's a storm of gray areas, power plays, and personal choices with consequences that ripple far beyond the charity hall. And yet, this is just the surface. Because what really happened behind closed doors, the conversations, the negotiations, the furious phone calls, remains shrouded in secrecy. Some say Meghan demanded special treatment. Others insist she was blindsided. But one thing is certain. When Matt James drew the line, he set into motion a chain of events that will reverberate for years. And that's where we leave you, for now. Because if Meghan Markle's alleged ban from WellChild shocked you, wait until you hear what came next. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted, tempers flared, and the stakes for Harry and Meghan's future reached levels no one could have predicted. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if I told you that before Meghan Markle, before Netflix, before the Sussex drama ever hit the front pages, Prince Harry had already found a calling that gave him dignity, purpose, and something no amount of royal duty or military service could quite replicate? That calling was WellChild. And to understand why Meghan's alleged ban from the WellChild Awards is such a devastating blow, you have to understand the history behind Harry's connection to this charity. Because this is not just another event on his calendar. It is the emotional core of his public identity. WellChild isn't your ordinary charity. Founded in 1977 under a different name and later rebranded, its mission is simple yet profound: to give seriously ill children and their families the support they need to live full, happy lives at home, instead of long stays in hospitals. Their nurses, their programs, their community building. All of it is designed to give these children a semblance of normalcy, a taste of freedom, and a chance at joy. And for decades, WellChild has been a quiet but powerful force in the UK charity landscape. Now, enter Prince Harry. His patronage began in 2007, long before Meghan, long before Netflix, long before the Sussex name became a global brand. At the time, Harry was still in his 20s, a soldier, a royal, and a young man still trying to figure out who he was outside of his mother's shadow. But something about WellChild struck a chord with him. Here was a cause that was not about pomp or politics. It was about children. Vulnerable, brave children fighting uphill battles every single day. The first time Harry attended a WellChild event, reports say he was visibly moved. And who wouldn't be? Imagine standing in a room filled with children in wheelchairs, hooked up to oxygen, some unable to speak, others clinging to life with extraordinary resilience. Now imagine the way they looked at Harry, not as a prince, not as a tabloid headline, but as a person, someone who laughed with them, listened to them, and cried with them. This was not a stage performance. It was raw. It was real. And it quickly became a tradition. Year after year, Harry would attend the WellChild Awards, meeting the children, their parents, their nurses, their doctors. And in those moments, the cameras caught something rare: authenticity. Harry wasn't stiff or distant or rehearsed. He was present. He was emotional. He was human. And the public noticed. In a monarchy often accused of being aloof and disconnected, Harry became the prince of the people, not just because of his rebellious streak or his charm, but because of moments like these. But here's the irony. While Harry found purpose in WellChild, the charity also found something in him. His visibility elevated their mission. His tears during speeches, those iconic moments where his voice cracked as he spoke about the courage of the children, brought national attention. Donations surged. Awareness grew. The bond between WellChild and Harry was symbiotic. They gave him meaning, and he gave them visibility. So when Meghan Markle entered the picture years later, she wasn't just stepping into a royal role. She was stepping into a space sacred to Harry's identity. And that's what makes this story so powerful, because WellChild wasn't just a cause, it was his cause. But let's pause here. Ask yourself this. How would you feel if the one thing that gave you purpose outside of family drama, outside of institutional duty, outside of personal chaos, was suddenly pulled into the whirlwind of celebrity, branding, and media exploitation? Would you fight to protect it? Or would you let it be consumed, hoping it might serve a bigger purpose? This is where the cracks began to show. Because while Harry's connection to WellChild was deeply personal, Meghan's approach was strategic. And though she played her role at the awards with perfect grace, critics quickly began asking, was she there for the children or for the cameras? But before we dive into Meghan's first appearance and the stir it caused, let's take a closer look at one defining WellChild moment that cemented Harry's bond forever. In 2019, just months after Archie's birth, Harry took the stage at the WellChild Awards. As he began to speak about the bravery of parents caring for sick children, his voice broke. Tears streamed down his face as he confessed he had only recently understood the depth of that struggle, because he had just become a father himself. It was raw. It was vulnerable. It was unforgettable. That speech wasn't just reported. It was replayed, analyzed, dissected. It went viral. And for a fleeting moment, Harry wasn't the prince at war with his family. He was the young boy who had lost his mother, now grown into a man who understood the fragility of life in ways words could barely capture. That moment defined Harry's relationship with WellChild, and it defined how the world saw him. Which makes what happened years later, Meghan's alleged attempt to bring a Netflix crew into that sacred space, all the more shocking. Because here's the thing, WellChild isn't just another royal duty. It's not like cutting ribbons or shaking hands at a fundraiser. It's deeply personal. And when something so personal gets entangled with Hollywood contracts and Netflix producers, the result isn't just awkward. It's explosive. And as history shows, when Harry's personal passions collide with Meghan's strategic ambitions, sparks fly, and the fallout can be catastrophic. But the story doesn't end there. Because as Meghan stepped into WellChild's world for the first time, the narrative began to change. And that's where things really started to unravel. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The first time Meghan Markle walked into a WellChild Awards ceremony alongside Prince Harry, the air shifted. It wasn't just another royal engagement. It wasn't just another evening of polite applause, speeches, and photographs. No, this was different. For Harry, WellChild was sacred. For Meghan, it was a stage, and the world was about to see what happened when those two realities collided. Picture the scene. A hall filled with brave children, their parents, doctors, and caregivers. Families who had been through storms most of us can't even imagine. Sleepless nights in hospital wards, terrifying diagnoses, fleeting moments of hope. The WellChild Awards were designed to honor these warriors, to give them a night free from fear, filled instead with recognition, dignity, and love. And then, in walked Meghan Markle. She was dazzling. A sleek gown, perfectly styled hair. Cameras clicked furiously as flashes illuminated her every step. She smiled warmly. She shook hands gracefully. And she carried herself with the practiced ease of someone who had been on red carpets long before she'd ever been near a royal stage. To the crowd, it was a surreal juxtaposition. Hollywood glamour in a room meant for quiet courage. Now let's pause here. Was Meghan doing anything wrong in that moment? Not at all. She was fulfilling her role as Harry's wife and a newly minted duchess. But here's the catch. The whispers began almost immediately. Because in every candid photograph, in every press clipping, in every viral tweet, Meghan wasn't just present at the WellChild Awards. She was central, and that's where the problem began. For years, WellChild had been Harry's personal sanctuary, a space where the spotlight dimmed and the focus remained on the children. But the night Meghan joined him, something shifted. Suddenly, the media headlines weren't just about the courageous kids or Harry's moving speeches. They were about Meghan's dress, Meghan's smile, Meghan's body language. Meghan steals the show at WellChild Awards, one headline read. Harry emotional, but Meghan dazzles, another declared. The narrative was no longer about the children. It was about her. And the irony? Meghan didn't need to do much to command that attention. Her mere presence was enough. She was a global celebrity stepping into a deeply personal royal moment, and that contrast created instant tension. But what did Harry think? Insiders claim Harry was thrilled to have Meghan by his side, at least at first. To him, it was validation, his wife sharing in something that meant so much to him. Yet, beneath the surface, there was unease. Some WellChild staff allegedly noticed the cameras lingering on Meghan more than the award winners. Some parents quietly questioned whether the evening was turning into a royal photo shoot rather than a celebration of their children's resilience. Now, ask yourself this. If you were a parent of a child fighting for life, would you want your moment of recognition to be overshadowed by the Duchess's gown or her Hollywood smile? Would you feel honored or sidelined? The contradictions deepened. Meghan's speeches, though polished, sometimes carried the cadence of a campaign rally rather than the raw vulnerability that Harry embodied. Where Harry choked on his words, Meghan delivered hers flawlessly. Where Harry wiped tears, Meghan struck poise. The contrast was undeniable, and the public noticed. Then came the tabloids. And let's be clear, British tabloids have a way of amplifying tension until it becomes a national obsession. They began dissecting every gesture, every glance, every choice. Was Meghan gazing lovingly at Harry, or was she performing for the cameras? Was she sincerely moved by the children's stories, or was she scanning the room for the best angles? The critiques were relentless, but they struck a deeper nerve because they touched on something sacred, the authenticity of WellChild. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Meghan's first appearance wasn't just about optics. It became a rehearsal for something bigger. Because months later, rumors swirled that Meghan and Harry's media teams were exploring ways to integrate their philanthropic work into their brand deals. And at the center of those discussions? WellChild. After all, it was visually powerful. It was emotionally gripping. It was everything Netflix could want. Suddenly, Meghan's entrance into WellChild wasn't just a duchess showing up at her husband's favorite charity. It was the opening act of a larger drama, one that would pit celebrity ambition against the private dignity of sick children. And here's the cruel irony. For Meghan, this was about visibility. For Harry, this was about heart. But for Matt James, the WellChild CEO, it was about something else entirely: protection. Because while the world debated Meghan's motives and Harry's emotions, James was quietly watching, weighing, and preparing for a decision that would one day make headlines around the world. But what happened next? The moment when Netflix's hunger collided with WellChild's mission would ignite a storm no one could contain, and the fallout would shake both the Sussexes and the charity to their core. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine this. You've just signed a deal worth tens of millions of dollars with one of the most powerful entertainment platforms in the world. The headlines scream historic, groundbreaking, unprecedented. For Harry and Meghan, that was their Netflix contract. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to control their narrative, reshape their image, and deliver content that would make them not just royals, but global superstars. But here's the problem no one talked about at the time. Netflix doesn't hand out hundreds of millions for photo ops and polite speeches. They want drama. They want exclusivity. They want stories no one else can tell, packaged for binge-worthy television. And that hunger, that relentless pressure, was about to change everything for the Sussexes. Now ask yourself this. What happens when a couple whose currency is privacy sells their most valuable commodity: access? Where do you draw the line between living authentically and performing for the cameras? Between being a family and being a brand? That line blurred quickly. From the very beginning, Netflix executives weren't shy. They needed deliverables. They wanted royal-level spectacle. The company was bleeding subscribers at the time, desperate to fend off competitors like Disney Plus and Amazon. They needed big names, big content, big buzz. And Harry and Meghan were their ace in the hole. But there was one catch. Meghan and Harry's real lives, outside of the drama with the palace, were quiet. Too quiet. After leaving the royal family, they settled into Montecito. They gave interviews, yes. They made speeches, sure. But where was the raw, gripping, behind-the-scenes footage Netflix craved? Where was the content that justified those massive checks? That's when the Sussex's philanthropic calendar took on a whole new meaning. Events like Invictus, charity galas, and yes, WellChild, suddenly weren't just causes. They were content opportunities. And here's the contradiction. Meghan and Harry insisted their work was about service, compassion, and authenticity. But behind closed doors, according to insiders, Netflix executives were pushing for exclusivity. They didn't just want Meghan and Harry attending events. They wanted cameras there. They wanted access no one else could buy. That's where WellChild became the perfect storm. Think about it. The WellChild Awards had everything Netflix could ask for. Tear-jerking stories of children overcoming impossible odds, the raw emotional pull of Harry breaking down in tears, and Meghan standing at his side, a glamorous duchess turned Hollywood producer. It was the kind of event that practically wrote itself as a documentary episode. And Netflix knew it. Pressure began to mount. Production schedules loomed. Deadlines tightened. The Sussexes' first projects hadn't exactly set the world on fire, and Netflix's patience was wearing thin. They needed Meghan and Harry to deliver something powerful, something that would justify the staggering cost of their contract. Now, picture Meghan in this scenario. She's not just a duchess anymore. She's a producer, a brand builder, someone responsible for turning everyday life into content. Every event, every handshake, every speech is weighed not just for its meaning, but for its cinematic potential. And so, according to insiders, the idea of bringing a Netflix crew to WellChild began to take shape. Not because Meghan didn't care about the children, not because Harry wasn't genuinely passionate about the cause, but because Netflix needed content, and WellChild offered exactly the kind of emotional, visual gold that streaming thrives on. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Charities and cameras don't always mix. For families at WellChild, those awards aren't about spectacle. They're about recognition, dignity, and a moment away from the relentless grind of hospitals and treatments. To introduce Hollywood crews into that equation risked turning a sacred night into a stage play. And this is where the clash became unavoidable. Matt James, WellChild's CEO, wasn't naive. He knew the Sussex's star power was good for the charity. But he also knew the line had to be drawn somewhere. Families trusted WellChild because it wasn't exploitative. It wasn't about clicks or headlines. It was about children. And when whispers began that Meghan might be planning to bring her Netflix team into that sacred space, alarm bells rang. Now, here's where things get even more complicated. Netflix wasn't the only factor. Spotify had already dropped Harry and Meghan's podcast deal, publicly calling them out for underdelivering. That embarrassment put even more pressure on the couple to make their Netflix deal work. They couldn't afford another failure. They couldn't afford to let Netflix lose faith. So the stage was set. On one side, Meghan and Harry, desperate to prove their worth, under immense pressure to deliver high-quality, emotional content. On the other, Matt James and WellChild, determined to protect their families and their mission from being reduced to footage for a streaming giant. And in the middle, Harry, the prince who had once found comfort and authenticity in WellChild, was now watching it morph into a battleground between his wife's ambitions and a charity's principles. Imagine the torment of that position. The one place that had always felt safe for him was now at risk of becoming another front in the Sussex brand wars. But Harry's silence spoke volumes. He didn't push back. He didn't make a stand. And that silence left WellChild's leadership with one choice. Act decisively, or risk betraying the families they served. And that's when the decision was made. But what happened next wasn't just about Meghan, or Harry, or even Netflix. It was about a CEO willing to risk everything to draw the line no one else dared cross. And that line would spark a confrontation that still reverberates today. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when Hollywood ambition collides with a charity built on trust and dignity? To understand the explosive clash at WellChild, we need to step into Meghan Markle's world at the very moment when the Sussexes' empire was teetering. Netflix was calling. Deadlines loomed. Content had to be delivered. And according to insiders, Meghan wasn't just passively waiting for magic to happen. She was pitching. She was planning. She was strategizing. And at the center of those plans? The WellChild Awards. Now imagine the scene. Behind closed doors in Montecito, Meghan and her media team are brainstorming. The contract with Netflix is on the table, figuratively and literally. Millions of dollars invested. Global expectations soaring. But what's missing? The Sussexes don't just need content. They need moments. Authentic, emotionally raw moments that will grip viewers and go viral. And Meghan knows how to spot them. Her Hollywood instincts kick in. WellChild is perfect. It has everything. Sick children whose stories inspire hope and heartbreak. Harry's deep emotional connection that makes him tear up on stage. The visual spectacle of an awards ceremony filled with courage and resilience. Add Meghan at his side. Beautiful, composed, charismatic. And suddenly, you have a documentary segment Netflix executives would salivate over. But here's the catch. How do you pitch that without making it look exploitative? According to whispers, Meghan's team floated the idea subtly at first. They spoke about the importance of capturing Harry's charitable work. They stressed that their platform could amplify WellChild's mission globally. And to some extent, they weren't wrong. A Netflix feature could bring millions in donations, could spotlight the struggles of these families, could expand WellChild's reach beyond the UK. But beneath that noble veneer lurked another truth. Netflix didn't want just speeches. They wanted raw footage. They wanted behind-the-scenes moments. They wanted intimacy. The kind you can't fake, the kind you can't stage, the kind that turns real human suffering into ratings gold. And that's where Meghan's pitch grew bolder. Insiders claim that discussions moved from abstract ideas to logistical questions. Could a small camera crew be present discreetly? Could interviews with families be conducted? Could Harry and Meghan's interactions with children be filmed, not just for WellChild archives, but for streaming audiences around the world? To Meghan, this wasn't exploitation. It was storytelling. She saw herself as shining a light on resilience, amplifying voices that would otherwise go unheard. But to WellChild's leadership, the line between storytelling and spectacle was already blurring, and dangerously so. Now picture Matt James, the CEO of WellChild, listening to this pitch. On one hand, he understands the value. Meghan and Harry bring visibility. A Netflix spotlight could transform donations and awareness overnight. On the other hand, he feels the unease. Families trust WellChild because it's private, safe, and free from exploitation. To break that trust for cameras, even discreet ones, would risk destroying everything the charity had built. This is where the tension crystallized. Was Meghan truly focused on the children, or on creating powerful content to feed the Netflix machine? Did her team underestimate how protective WellChild was of its families? Or did they believe the Sussex name was too valuable to refuse? One WellChild insider allegedly confided to journalists later that Meghan's team misread the room. They thought charity leaders would be dazzled by the global platform. Instead, they were disturbed by the idea of transforming children's stories of pain into entertainment content. And the irony? Meghan wasn't even the first royal to bring cameras into a cause. Princess Diana had done it before. She allowed cameras into her most emotional charity visits, not for herself, but to shine a light on issues like AIDS, landmines, and homelessness. But here's the difference. Diana wasn't under contract. She wasn't trying to deliver episodes to a streaming giant. Her authenticity wasn't in question. Meghan's, however, was. And that's why the pitch backfired. What Meghan saw as an opportunity, Matt James saw as a threat. To him, this wasn't a question of visibility. It was a question of values. And the values of WellChild were simple. The children come first. Their dignity comes first. Their privacy comes first. Which meant that Netflix crews, no matter how small, no matter how discreet, could not come through those doors. When Meghan reportedly pushed harder, emphasizing the reach and impact Netflix could provide, James held firm. And it wasn't just a polite refusal. It was a line in the sand. No cameras. No crews. Not at WellChild. And that refusal, spoken clearly, directly, without compromise, was the moment this story ignited. Because in that instant, Meghan wasn't just a duchess trying to support her husband's favorite charity. She was a Hollywood producer being told no. And that no didn't just sting. It threatened her entire brand strategy. Because if Netflix couldn't get access here, where else could they? If Harry's most personal and emotional charity was off limits, what did that leave them with? Polished speeches? Red carpet handshakes? Meghan knew it wasn't enough. Netflix knew it wasn't enough. The Sussex brand was on the line. And Meghan's frustration, insiders say, was palpable. Furious phone calls. Heated debates. A battle of wills between Hollywood ambition and charity principles. And in the end, it was Meghan who blinked first. Not because she wanted to, but because Matt James refused to bend. But the fallout from that clash wouldn't stay behind closed doors. Soon, the whispers leaked. Soon, the headlines blazed. And suddenly, Meghan wasn't the compassionate duchess championing children. She was the ambitious producer who tried to turn their struggles into content. And the consequences of that perception would haunt her far beyond the walls of WellChild. Because if Meghan couldn't win here, what hope did she have of winning anywhere else? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who dares to say no to Meghan Markle? Who has the courage to push back when one of the most media-savvy, globally recognizable women on the planet wants something? In this case, it was Matt James, the CEO of WellChild. And his decision didn't just ripple through the charity world. It shook the Sussex narrative to its core. To understand why his no mattered so much, we have to understand the man behind the ban. Matt James isn't a celebrity. He doesn't chase cameras. His name doesn't trend on social media. But within the charity world, he's a giant. For years, he has worked quietly, diligently, and passionately to protect the values of WellChild. He's not a royal courtier or a Hollywood producer. He's a man whose loyalty lies first and foremost with children and their families. That's why, when Meghan Markle's alleged Netflix plans crossed his desk, his response wasn't political. It was principled. Let's go back. James began his career not in entertainment or publicity, but in service. His focus was on charity operations, ensuring that WellChild delivered practical help. Funding specialist nurses, creating resources for parents, and giving families the support they desperately needed. He wasn't in it for glory. He wasn't in it for recognition. He was in it for impact. So when he rose to the role of CEO, he carried that same philosophy into every decision. To James, WellChild's events were sacred. Not because they attracted royals, not because they generated press, but because they gave children and their families moments of dignity. Moments away from hospital rooms. Moments where their courage was celebrated. And here's where the conflict becomes painfully clear. Meghan's world is built on optics. James's world is built on trust. Meghan thinks in terms of platforms, brands, and reach. James thinks in terms of children, parents, and promises. For Meghan, WellChild was a powerful image. For James, it was a sanctuary. The two visions were never going to coexist. So when whispers began that Meghan wanted to bring Netflix cameras into the WellChild Awards, James didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh the political risks. He didn't measure the potential backlash from the Sussex PR machine. He went back to the first principle of the charity, protect the children. And that meant banning Meghan. Think about the weight of that decision for a moment. This wasn't a small local group saying no. This was a nationally respected charity directly refusing access to a duchess, a global celebrity, a woman married to the son of King Charles. That's not a small stand. That's a seismic one. But here's what makes James remarkable. He didn't do it for headlines. He didn't do it for drama. He did it because he knew the families. He had spoken with parents who feared their child's illness being turned into spectacle. He had listened to nurses who worried about cameras in rooms that should remain private. He had seen the fragility of children who already lived under enough pressure without being thrust into Netflix's spotlight. For James, the choice was simple. Protect the children. Even if it meant clashing with the Sussexes. Even if it meant being labeled anti-Meghan. Even if it meant headlines he never asked for. And let's not forget the timing. By the time this alleged clash unfolded, Meghan and Harry were under enormous strain. Their Spotify deal had collapsed. Their reputation in the UK was plummeting. Netflix executives were breathing down their necks. Meghan was desperate to deliver. And into that storm stepped Matt James, a man unwilling to compromise. Now, ask yourself this. How often do we see someone in the public eye stand up against celebrity culture? How often do people risk being bulldozed by PR machines just to say, "No, not here"? James's defiance wasn't just a personal act. It was symbolic. It was a reminder that sometimes principles matter more than platforms. But the fallout was immediate. Rumors of Meghan's ban leaked. Headlines exploded. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't the Duchess of Compassion. She was the Hollywood producer blocked from exploiting vulnerable children. And behind it all, the man pulling the strings was Matt James. Yet James never boasted. He never gave interviews crowing about his decision. He stayed silent, dignified, rooted in the mission of his charity. His silence, ironically, screamed louder than Meghan's PR statements ever could. And here's the twist. James's stand wasn't just about protecting children. It also indirectly protected Harry. Because had cameras been allowed, Harry's most personal cause would have become another Netflix episode. Another brand-building exercise. Another performance. James, knowingly or not, preserved the authenticity of Harry's connection to WellChild, even as Meghan allegedly tried to turn it into content. But there's another layer here. By banning Meghan, James wasn't just protecting WellChild. He was challenging the Sussexes' entire strategy. If they couldn't leverage Harry's most emotional cause, what else did they have? If Netflix couldn't get WellChild, what could they get that was equally powerful? James had drawn a line, and in doing so, he exposed just how fragile Meghan's media empire really was. And that's the real power of his decision. It wasn't just about one night, one event, one refusal. It was about the precedent it set. If WellChild could say no to Meghan, then others could too. If one charity CEO could stand up to the Sussexes, then suddenly their aura of untouchability began to crumble. And Meghan knew it. For someone whose brand thrives on access, control, and image, being publicly blocked was devastating. It wasn't just a bruise. It was a fracture. And the man who delivered that fracture was Matt James, a name Meghan likely never expected to become her obstacle. But what happened next would prove that the ban was just the beginning. Because once Meghan's fury collided with royal politics, the fallout became far bigger than anyone could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment word began to circulate that Meghan Markle had been effectively banned from the WellChild Awards, the ripples reached Buckingham Palace. And make no mistake, when something involves Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and a beloved children's charity, the royal family pays attention. But behind the palace walls, the reaction wasn't uniform. It wasn't calm. It wasn't simple. It was complicated, divided, and tense. Because this wasn't just about a charity event anymore. This was about image. It was about loyalty. It was about the monarchy itself standing on one side, and Harry and Meghan, once again, on the other. Let's start with King Charles. For Charles, WellChild is not just Harry's charity. It's one of those rare institutions that the monarchy can hold up as proof of its relevance. A cause that connects the crown to ordinary people. A charity that showcases compassion, empathy, and human dignity. And Charles knew this. He had seen Harry shine at the WellChild Awards, watched the headlines, heard the applause. It was one of the few areas where Harry outshone even William. So when Matt James reportedly drew the line against Meghan bringing Netflix cameras, Charles's reaction was measured but firm. Privately, he supported James. He understood the importance of protecting the sanctity of the event. But there was another layer here too. Charles also recognized the political opportunity. For years, Meghan and Harry had accused the firm of cruelty, of shutting them out, of prioritizing optics over humanity. Now, here was a case where the monarchy didn't need to say a word. A charity CEO had done the work for them, and Charles wasn't about to intervene to save Meghan. Then there was Prince William. His perspective was sharper, colder. For William, Meghan's attempt to use WellChild for Netflix wasn't just inappropriate, it was unforgivable. William has always been fiercely protective of the monarchy's charitable image. He's built his own reputation around mental health campaigns, conservation work, and dignified, carefully managed charity partnerships. To him, Meghan's move was the exact opposite of dignity. It was exploitation. And so, according to palace insiders, William quietly backed James's decision, perhaps even celebrated it. Not publicly, never publicly, but behind closed doors. William saw it as proof that Meghan's influence could be challenged and that Harry's causes could be protected from being swallowed by Hollywood ambition. But here's where it gets messy. For Harry, this was personal. He had never wanted Meghan to be sidelined. He had fought tooth and nail to carve out a space for her within his world, to make her feel included in the royal orbit, to prove to her that she was not an outsider. And now, here was his most personal charity effectively rejecting her. The optics couldn't have been worse. Imagine being Harry. The one place where you've always felt authentic, where your emotions have flowed freely, where your tears have been celebrated, suddenly becomes a source of conflict between your wife and the very institution you fled. How does that feel? Betrayal? Shame? Anger? Probably all three. And the silence from the palace made it worse. Because Charles didn't defend Meghan. William didn't defend Meghan. The royal family, as usual, said nothing. And in royal terms, silence often speaks louder than words. By saying nothing, they allowed the narrative to take root. Meghan had overstepped, and WellChild had stopped her. Now, here's where the tension hit boiling point. Meghan, furious at being blocked, allegedly turned her frustration not just on Matt James, but on Harry himself. After all, Harry had the connections. Harry had the history. Harry could have fought harder to push for her inclusion. But he didn't. He hesitated. He stayed silent. And for Meghan, that silence felt like betrayal. Meanwhile, within palace circles, some courtiers whispered that this was the Sussexes' comeuppance. That after years of criticism, interviews, and accusations, the couple had finally been shown that not every door would open for them. Not every charity would bend. Not every cause would play along. And then came the media frenzy. The story leaked. Headlines screamed that Meghan had been banned. The palace didn't comment, but they didn't need to. The press was already running wild, dissecting every angle. Was Meghan exploiting children for Netflix? Was Harry powerless to protect her? Was WellChild's decision a quiet victory for William and Charles? For the public, the optics were devastating. Harry, once the proud patron of WellChild, now seemed caught between his wife's Hollywood ambitions and his family's silent disapproval. Meghan, once the Duchess of Compassion, now looked like a producer chasing content at the expense of sick children. And the monarchy, for once, didn't look cruel or out of touch. They looked protective, dignified, almost vindicated. But beneath the surface, the tensions were darker than anyone realized. Because for Harry, this wasn't just about Meghan being banned. It was about his legacy at WellChild being tainted. It was about the one safe space he had left becoming another battlefield. And for Meghan, it wasn't just about being blocked. It was about being humiliated. It was about being told no in front of the world. That mix, Harry's wounded pride, Meghan's fury, Charles's silence, and William's quiet approval, created a storm behind palace doors. A storm that no amount of PR could fully contain. And the truth is, this was only the beginning. Because Meghan's anger didn't stop at private complaints. According to insiders, she was ready to strike back, and her next move would drag the entire controversy into even deeper waters. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When Meghan Markle learned she was effectively banned from the WellChild Awards, the reaction was not calm. It was not dignified. It was fury. And according to whispers from those who claimed to have witnessed the fallout, that fury wasn't a quiet frustration, it was volcanic. Because for Meghan, this wasn't just a door closing. It was a public humiliation, a rejection that struck at the very core of her identity, her strategy, and her carefully crafted narrative. Picture it. Behind the polished exterior, the Montecito mansion, the elegant photo ops, Meghan receives the call, or perhaps the email, that confirms she will not be allowed to bring her Netflix crew into WellChild. Not only that, but the CEO himself, Matt James, has drawn the line. For Meghan, a woman who had risen from Hollywood actress to duchess, who had outmaneuvered tabloids, courtiers, and even palace aides, being told no in such blunt terms was intolerable. And the reaction, insiders say, was explosive. Staff members allegedly described an atmosphere of chaos. Raised voices, urgent calls, Meghan pacing, venting about betrayal. After all, hadn't she and Harry brought enormous visibility to WellChild? Hadn't her presence guaranteed more headlines, more donations, more global reach? In Meghan's view, she wasn't exploiting the charity, she was elevating it. And yet, here she was, being treated like an intruder. But it wasn't just about WellChild. It was about what this decision symbolized. If one charity could block her, what message did that send to others? If WellChild could say no to Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, what was stopping others from following suit? To Meghan, this wasn't just a rejection. It was a crack in the armor of her brand. And cracks spread quickly. Allegedly, Meghan's fury wasn't confined to WellChild. It spilled over into her marriage. Because when the news broke that she was banned, where was Harry? Silent, hesitant, torn. Meghan, according to insiders, interpreted his silence as weakness. Why wasn't he fighting harder for her? Why wasn't he using his influence, his history with WellChild, to overrule the decision? For Harry, the answer was complicated. He couldn't. Matt James wasn't a palace aide to be strong-armed. He wasn't a courtier to be pressured. He was a man protecting children, and Harry knew it. But explaining that to Meghan, at a time when her pride was wounded and her anger blazing, was nearly impossible. And so, the tension grew. Meghan reportedly accused Harry of abandoning her, of allowing her to be humiliated, of failing to shield her from public embarrassment. And Harry, caught between loyalty to his wife and respect for WellChild, retreated further into silence. Now ask yourself this. How would you react if you were Meghan? Would you see the ban as a principled stand by a charity or as a personal attack? Would you accept it quietly, or would you fight back with every tool at your disposal? For Meghan, there was no question. She would fight. Insiders claim Meghan's fury quickly transformed into strategy. She began working her contacts in the media, shaping the narrative. If she was going to be painted as the villain, she would flip the script. She would present herself not as the Duchess blocked from a charity event, but as a woman unfairly targeted, excluded because of prejudice, silenced by institutions too afraid of her voice. And the media circus was ready to play along. Tabloids dissected every angle. American outlets leaned towards sympathy, painting Meghan as the outsider once again under siege. British outlets sharpened their knives, portraying her as the ambitious Duchess who dared to exploit sick children. And in the middle of it all, Meghan doubled down, refusing to let the narrative spin out of her control. But the fury wasn't just external. It was internal. Staffers reportedly described Meghan as restless, irritable, and demanding during this period. Meetings grew tense. PR strategies became frantic. Netflix executives, already frustrated by delays and lackluster content, now saw the WellChild debacle as a missed opportunity, a golden moment that slipped through their fingers. And who would they blame? Meghan. The irony was brutal. Meghan's fury at being banned didn't just damage her image, it exposed the fragility of her entire empire. Because the truth was this: without access to authentic moments like WellChild, her Netflix projects risked looking shallow, glossy, manufactured. And Netflix hadn't paid for glossy. They'd paid for raw. They'd paid for exclusive. They'd paid for Meghan and Harry's real lives. But what happens when the real world refuses to play along? That's the question Meghan was now facing. And her fury wasn't just about being blocked. It was about being exposed. For the first time since stepping into royal life, someone outside the palace had told her no. And that no had consequences she could not control. And here's the cruel twist. The harder Meghan pushed back, the worse the optics became. The more she raged against the ban, the more she looked like a duchess prioritizing cameras over children. Every move she made to reclaim control seemed to backfire, feeding the perception she feared most, that Meghan Markle was less about compassion and more about content. And if her fury was scorching in private, it was ice-cold in public. Meghan smiled for the cameras. She appeared calm, collected, serene. But behind that smile was a storm that threatened to consume not just her reputation, but her marriage, her Netflix deal, and her fragile relationship with the royal family. Because while Meghan fumed, the royals watched in silence. And silence, as always, was its own kind of weapon. But the real damage was yet to come. Because Meghan's fury wouldn't stay contained. It would spill over into public battles, into strategy wars, into a clash that would force Harry himself into an impossible position. And his silence, his choice, would leave the world stunned. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For Prince Harry, WellChild wasn't just another engagement on the royal calendar. It wasn't just another photo op where he could stand, smile, and wave. It was personal. It was emotional. It was real. And that's why Meghan's clash with WellChild, and her fury over being banned, wasn't just a public scandal. It was a private nightmare. Because Harry found himself standing in the crossfire, torn between his wife's ambitions and the one cause that had always anchored him. Let's rewind for a moment. Harry's bond with WellChild was forged in vulnerability. He wasn't there as a stiff royal in uniform. He was there as Diana's son, as a boy who knew what it meant to suffer loss, as a man who openly cried when speaking about sick children and their families. It was one of the few times he felt truly understood. In the charity's quiet halls, he wasn't the spare. He wasn't the rebel prince. He wasn't the tabloid headline. He was simply Harry. And now, that sanctuary was slipping through his fingers. Because when Meghan allegedly pushed to bring Netflix into WellChild, and when Matt James refused, Harry's two worlds collided. On one side stood Meghan, the woman he'd given up his family, his home, and his royal role to protect. On the other stood WellChild, the charity that had given him purpose and authenticity long before Meghan entered his life. How do you choose between those two? For Harry, the answer was silence. But silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. And in this case, his silence betrayed everything. Insiders claim Harry was visibly torn. In private, he defended Meghan, insisting she was misunderstood, that her intentions were good, that she only wanted to help. But in the same breath, he acknowledged the charity's concerns. He couldn't deny that cameras would change everything. He couldn't deny that families might feel used. He couldn't deny that WellChild was right to protect its children. And so Harry retreated. He didn't fight for Meghan the way she expected. He didn't call Matt James demanding a reversal. He didn't throw his weight around, reminding WellChild of his years of service. Instead, he hesitated. He froze. He chose not to escalate. And that choice only deepened Meghan's anger. Now imagine the tension inside their Montecito home. Meghan, furious, pacing, demanding why Harry wasn't doing more. Harry, shoulders slumped, torn between love and loyalty, unable to find the words. For Meghan, it looked like betrayal. For Harry, it felt like an impossible bind. And the irony? Harry had been here before. All his life, Harry had been pulled between competing worlds, between duty and freedom, between the royal family and his own desires, between the expectations of the crown and the shadow of his mother's legacy. And now, history was repeating itself. Once again, he was caught between two forces he loved, two identities he couldn't reconcile. And once again, he was forced to choose, or to remain silent and risk losing both. But silence came with consequences. Because while Meghan raged and the palace remained icy in its silence, Harry's absence from the debate spoke volumes to the public. He looked weak, passive, powerless, a prince stripped of agency, trapped between a furious wife and a disappointed family. And for the first time, cracks in his own image began to show. The Harry the world had admired, the raw, emotional man at WellChild events, the soldier who fought alongside comrades, the son who carried Diana's torch, was fading. In his place stood a man who seemed adrift, lost in the swirl of Meghan's fury and the charity's defiance. And here's the bitter truth. Harry's silence didn't protect him. It only made him look complicit. If Meghan was accused of trying to exploit WellChild, Harry, by not speaking out, looked like her enabler. If the charity was praised for protecting children, Harry, by staying quiet, looked like he had abandoned the very cause he claimed to love. For WellChild, the silence was deafening. Families who had once trusted Harry felt betrayed. Some whispered that he had changed, that the man who once wept for their children had been replaced by a man too afraid to stand up to his wife. And for the royal family, the silence was convenient. They didn't need to condemn Meghan. They didn't need to comment at all. Harry's hesitation did the work for them. His lack of action became the story. His weakness became the headline. Now ask yourself this. If you were Harry, what would you do? Would you stand by your wife, even if it meant damaging your most cherished cause? Or would you stand by your charity, even if it meant angering the woman you sacrificed everything to protect? That's the impossible question Harry faced, and his refusal to answer it only deepened the cracks in his marriage, his reputation, and his legacy. But the story doesn't end with silence. Because while Harry stood frozen, the public wasn't. The backlash was growing. The media frenzy was intensifying. And Meghan, sensing that her fury alone wasn't enough, prepared to launch her counterstrike. And that counterstrike would turn the WellChild controversy from a private humiliation into a global scandal. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment whispers of Meghan Markle's alleged ban from the WellChild Awards leaked, the story exploded into the public arena like gasoline meeting fire. The headlines didn't crawl, they sprinted. Tabloids plastered it across front pages. Online news outlets dissected every angle, and social media ignited with fury, sarcasm, and debate. What had started as a quiet clash behind closed doors now became a full-blown public spectacle. And here's the kicker. The backlash wasn't just aimed at Meghan. It ricocheted in all directions, at Harry, at the Sussex brand, at Netflix, and even at the monarchy itself. Everyone had a stake, and everyone had an opinion. The British tabloids, always eager to sharpen their knives when it came to Meghan, went for the jugular. Headlines screamed, Meghan barred from Harry's beloved charity. No Netflix at WellChild. CEO draws the line. Duchess turns children into content. The framing was brutal. Meghan wasn't cast as a compassionate duchess seeking to highlight children's stories. She was portrayed as a Hollywood opportunist, hungry for footage, willing to blur the line between empathy and exploitation. But it wasn't just the tabloids. Broadsheets and more serious media outlets joined the fray. Commentators asked tough questions. Was this the inevitable result of Meghan and Harry's Netflix deal? Had their pursuit of financial independence transformed them into something worse? Content creators feeding off their causes? And then came social media. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Millions of users had something to say. Hashtags like #WellChildBan and #NetflixDuchess trended. Memes erupted. Some mocked Meghan for being too Hollywood. Others blasted Harry for staying silent. Still others defended Meghan, framing her as the eternal outsider unfairly targeted by British institutions. Now let's pause and ask, why did this story catch fire so quickly? The answer lies in contradictions. Meghan and Harry had built their post-royal identity on compassion and privacy. They left the monarchy claiming they wanted to protect their children from cameras, from press intrusion, from exploitation. And yet here they were, accused of doing the very thing they condemned, turning vulnerable children into Netflix content. The hypocrisy was glaring, and the public saw it immediately. And for Harry, the backlash cut especially deep. The WellChild Awards had always been his safe space, his heart. For the public to even entertain the idea that he might have allowed Meghan to turn it into spectacle was devastating. He had once been praised for crying on stage at WellChild. Now he was being criticized for his silence, for his failure to protect the dignity of the event. Parents of WellChild children added their voices, too. Some publicly thanked Matt James and the charity for safeguarding their kids from intrusion. Others gave interviews, anonymously or on record, expressing relief that their family's private struggles wouldn't become Netflix content. Their words added a layer of authenticity to the backlash. This wasn't just gossip, it was about real families drawing a line. And then came the domino effect. Other charities and organizations began watching closely. If Meghan could be banned here, could she be banned elsewhere? If Netflix was denied access to WellChild, would other causes follow suit? Suddenly, Meghan and Harry's ability to leverage their philanthropic work for content seemed fragile. But the backlash didn't stop with the couple. Netflix itself came under fire. Commentators questioned why the streaming giant was so intent on pushing the Sussexes into charity spaces. Viewers asked whether Netflix was complicit in trying to exploit children's suffering. The Sussex-Netflix partnership, once hailed as groundbreaking, began to look toxic. And what about the monarchy? Here's where the silence worked in their favor. Charles, William, and the rest of the royal family said nothing. No statements, no press briefings, no public commentary. And that silence spoke volumes. To the public, it looked like dignified restraint. To Meghan's critics, it looked like vindication. The palace didn't need to attack Meghan. The headlines did it for them. But silence can be a weapon, and it can also be a trap. Because for Meghan, the backlash didn't just sting, it festered. Every headline that painted her as opportunistic deepened her anger. Every meme that mocked her fueled her sense of victimhood. And every parent's thank you to Matt James sharpened the humiliation. And here's the twist. Meghan wasn't powerless. If the backlash was growing, she could push back. She could fight fire with fire. She could reframe the narrative, just as she had after Oprah, just as she had after the Netflix docuseries, just as she had after Spotify's collapse. The question wasn't if she would respond, it was how. Would she lean into victimhood, claiming she was once again unfairly targeted by a hostile UK establishment? Or would she pivot, portraying herself as a misunderstood champion whose intentions were noble, even if misread? The public backlash wasn't just a storm, it was a stage. And Meghan was already preparing her performance. But as she readied her counterstrike, another player stepped onto the board. Netflix. For them, the WellChild controversy wasn't just bad press, it was an opportunity. Because for a streaming giant hungry for content, Meghan's scandal wasn't a problem. It was a plotline. And Netflix, unlike WellChild, wasn't about to say no. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For Meghan and Harry, the WellChild ban was a humiliation. For Matt James, it was a principled stand. But for Netflix, it was gold. Pure, unfiltered, ratings-worthy gold. Because while Meghan and Harry were scrambling to control the narrative, Netflix executives were reportedly leaning back in their chairs, seeing controversy not as a liability, but as content. Think about it. Streaming thrives on conflict. Conflict sells. The Sussexes weren't just celebrities. They were global lightning rods, and every scandal surrounding them only deepened public fascination. Netflix didn't pay them tens of millions to deliver polished speeches or glossy charity reels. They paid for drama, for exclusivity, for the kind of tension that makes viewers binge, tweet, and argue for days. And the WellChild debacle? It had everything. On one side, a glamorous duchess painted as ambitious, scheming, even exploitative. On the other, a charity CEO standing firm, protecting sick children from Hollywood's glare. In the middle, Harry, torn between love and legacy, his silence speaking volumes. The monarchy, as always, lingering in the background like a silent antagonist. Add the fury of the public, the roar of the tabloids, and the whispers of betrayal inside Montecito. And suddenly, the Sussexes weren't just delivering content. They were the content. But here's the irony. While Meghan saw the ban as a devastating blow to her brand, Netflix executives may have seen it as the perfect subplot. A duchess under siege, a prince caught in the middle, a power struggle between Hollywood ambition and British tradition. Tell me that doesn't sound like the outline of a gripping docuseries episode. Now let's peel back the curtain. By the time this scandal broke, Netflix was already under immense pressure. Subscriber numbers were dipping, competition from Disney Plus and Amazon was intensifying, and Wall Street was demanding results. They needed the Sussexes to deliver more than carefully staged footage. They needed rawness. They needed scandal. And this was perfect. So while Meghan reportedly raged at being humiliated, Netflix strategists may have quietly celebrated. The narrative practically wrote itself. And whether Meghan realized it or not, her very fury, her very outrage, her very public struggle to control the story was the drama Netflix had wanted all along. Now ask yourself this. Was Meghan the author of her story, or was she the character in Netflix's? Because once the WellChild ban became a global talking point, Meghan and Harry's choices narrowed. Either they ignored it, letting the narrative spiral out of their control, or they addressed it, folding it into their journey. And if they addressed it, Netflix had their next episode. But here's where it gets darker. For families connected to WellChild, this wasn't content. It was trauma. Parents of sick children weren't interested in being characters in a Sussex storyline. They wanted privacy. They wanted dignity. They wanted to protect their kids from the circus. And that's why Matt James had acted so decisively. But in Hollywood, pain is product. And Netflix executives weren't about to walk away from a scandal this juicy. So what did they do? They waited. Patiently. Strategically. Because whether Meghan tried to spin herself as the victim or double down on her ambitions, Netflix would benefit. If she played the victim, they had another us versus them narrative. If she leaned into her producer role, they had behind-the-scenes footage of the Duchess fighting for her vision. Either way, Netflix won. And here's the twist. This wasn't just about WellChild. It was about precedent. If Meghan and Harry could be banned here, the same could happen elsewhere. Their access to charities, institutions, and events, the very lifeblood of their brand, was suddenly in question. And for Netflix, that raised the stakes. Because if the Sussexes couldn't deliver authentic, exclusive content, the entire deal was at risk. Which meant that every controversy, every headline, every clash became valuable. The Sussexes' failures became as marketable as their successes. Their humiliation was just as bingeable as their triumphs. And that left Meghan trapped. Because whether she fought back or stayed silent, whether she cried or raged, whether she won or lost, Netflix would turn it into a storyline. Her life had become content. Her fury had become a plot twist. And Harry? He wasn't just a prince anymore. He was a character, a conflicted protagonist in a drama far bigger than himself. But here's the question no one dared to ask out loud. Had Meghan and Harry already lost control of their own story? Were they producing the narrative, or starring in one written for them by streaming executives? Because if Netflix had a stake in the WellChild scandal, then Meghan's humiliation wasn't an accident. It was a commodity. And in Hollywood, commodities are meant to be consumed. But what came next would show just how fragile Meghan's image really was. Because while Netflix might have benefited, Meghan's reputation, once burnished by compassion, was about to collapse under the weight of contradiction. And that collapse would shake the Sussex empire to its very foundations. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.